Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for Managing Anxiety During Times of Crisis, facilitated by Lauren Garvey. If this is your first time participating in a Cancer Support Community Atlanta program, we invite you to visit our website, cscatlanta.org, and complete a new attendee form to stay connected to all future programs.
It's good to see everybody. This is a presentation about managing stress and anxiety during times of crisis. So very important topic. It's very relevant, obviously, for some more now than ever. I think it's a pretty unusual circumstance that everyone globally is experiencing some type of stress related to a similar experience. So I know that if anyone here has a television, you've heard someone say during these unprecedented times. It's a catchphrase, very widely used right now. I know everyone's sick of hearing it. How unprecedented times relates to stress and anxiety is that it's essentially what causes it, right? Our brain on anxiety wants to know what's going to happen, and it begins to predict it. So with this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about what stress and anxiety are, a few things about what they are not, because, you know, familiarizing ourselves with things can kind of demystify them and help us create our own strategies, because different things are going to work for everybody. But hopefully, because you called in and we're going to spend some time together, you'll leave this call with a few concrete strategies that you can put into play right away as soon as the call is over. So now we have a good number of folks. We can start rolling. So this first slide is very important, so I'm going to click it. Are you currently holding your breath? Noticing whether or not you are consistently breathing throughout the day can actually be strategy number one for affecting how you're feeling in terms of your body's response to stress and anxiety. We need breath. The breath is what gives us, you know, the ability to stay alive, to function. And unfortunately, we are often holding our breath throughout the day, just as we go about our business. So if you're currently holding your breath and haven't released it yet, take this opportunity to take a nice deep breath in, let it out, and we can keep going. Okay, so the thing about unprecedented times and how it applies to cancer survivors is anybody who's received that cancer diagnosis has experience with the unprecedented, right? I think one of the things that can be a really big deal for us when we have experienced a great change is that we adapt to that change with a set of coping skills. And people in the human brain are very, very creative. I try not to label or judge coping strategies as good or bad or adaptive or maladaptive. With that being said, you know, some coping skills are what I would consider more adaptive. One of the complications that the COVID pandemic has added to the coping that anyone who's in the middle of cancer treatment, a cancer survivor, you've learned these coping strategies, and some of them might not be available to you anymore. Some of those things might have shifted, you know, so whether your coping skill was social, right? Spending time with your support group, friends, maybe people delivered food to you and now it doesn't feel safe to have those food deliveries. Whatever it is that you, someone recently mentioned going to a gym was a really big coping skill for them throughout their treatment. So if any of your coping skills, you know, have shifted or are no longer available to you, I'm a big believer in the fact that if one gets taken away, we really need to focus on finding a way to replace that for us to, you know, be doing as well. Having been a counselor for some time, of course, I always encourage counseling and therapy at all times. I'm very biased. I feel that we can all benefit from it. But this presentation is not an ad for that. Another reason why I often see people come in, whether it's to spend time with me in my individual office or to join a group, is because they have had this series of changes or shifts. And that has made it so the tools that they were using all along weren't working for them anymore. They needed some more creative solutions. Or something new has happened and, you know, you don't know what to do. It's very disorienting, right? So any unprecedented situation provides us with a set of experiences that we do not have a frame of reference for. Okay, so we're gonna work together on seeing if we can't figure out how to create a frame. All right, what is stress? So stress gets a lot of press as a concept, especially, in our society. Stress can be glorified even, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm so busy. We can also be really fearful of the idea of stress based off of things that we've heard, things that people have said. And even if we can't define what stress is, we all know what it feels like in our body, right? We know the sensations. So as those physiological changes are arising, you're having that, your heart starts to beat fast and you start to heat up. And one of the issues is that a lot of these physiological stress changes line up with symptomology of this virus that we are all, hearing a lot about, reading a lot about. So I think it can be really important to kind of recognize or become more objective observers of our experience and know when we know what it feels like, how can we kind of step in? Is there a way to intervene? There are types of stress. So the chronic type of stress would be having lived with cancer for an extended period of time, having a job that either you don't align with, your workload exceeds the resources that you have. There are all types of things, but those are very based on conditions. Episodic can be, episodes contingent upon seasons of your life or things that are going on. And then, of course, acute would be the type of stress we typically experience during a crisis, right? So that's what we're talking about today. However, it's also important to acknowledge the other types of stress because adding in an acute form can impact what's added on to that more chronic stress, which is what we call the allostatic load. Is stress bad or harmful? Is all stress bad or harmful? So, stress primarily gets a lot of bad press, right? And unfortunately, that can be really scary. I cannot tell you how many people, after they've received a cancer diagnosis, have come to me and said, I was told to reduce my stress levels. So essentially what they heard in that appointment was, you have cancer, try not to stress out, which is an unreasonable expectation. So I think we should talk about stress. Is it all harmful? How does it impact us, and in what ways does it impact us differently? The type of stress that we refer to are doctors. Again, I'm not a medical doctor. This is an important disclaimer at all times. However, what I do know about the impact of adrenal stress response on our body is that it increases things like cortisol, and adrenaline is our direct physiological response to a perceived threat. Now, is all stress harmful? No. Without it, we really wouldn't get much done. It can be really helpful for us if we have a task or a challenge at hand, right? So Let's say, for example, you were putting together a Zoom presentation for the first time when you're accustomed to speaking in front of people and being able to see them. That was a new challenge for me. This is a very specific example. What helped me prepare is, as I went on figuring it out, my heart rate would elevate a little bit, right? And so it's going to pump more blood and more oxygen to my brain. And then hopefully the output is something that's as helpful as it could possibly be. That's what I'm trying to do. No pressure. Of course, it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of tasks and a lot of challenges in front of all of us right now, and everybody is going to be showing up imperfectly to everything. So that's something, that I've told myself about this. I hope you can tell yourself about the things that the challenges that you're facing. Our bodies and our brains respond to that cortisol and adrenaline. That's what triggers that fight or flight response that you are probably very familiar with. Now, our bodies are only designed to process a certain amount of cortisol. We are, to speak from evolutionary terms, we are at the top of the food chain. So a zebra, for example, can experience cortisol all day, and its body is able to use that to escape predators and process it, no problem. For us as people, especially if it's an amount that we're not accustomed to, this can really cause some, I'm not going to say, it's dangerous. It can cause some physiological effects. It can add a burden to our health. And that's, again, what I'm going to touch on with this idea of our allostatic load. We want our immune system nice and strong. And so if possible, we do want to become creative and find ways to reduce the amount of that excess unneeded cortisol and adrenaline, especially if there is not a challenge that we can utilize. If there's nowhere for it to go, it can cause some problems for us. So the type of stress that is not harmful is the type of physiological stress we experience when we are rising to meet a challenge. When there's a challenge or a threat that we perceive exceeds our available resources, that can become very draining. I also mentioned in that slide, you've probably gotten some unsolicited advice from some people in your lives if you've received a cancer diagnosis. Just acknowledging that that's annoying before I move on. Okay. What is anxiety? It's a psychological response to all of the physiological changes that we just discussed. And this can be related to a threat or a perceived threat. And that perception of the threat is very significant here. That's something that we can focus a lot of our efforts on in terms of finding good and creative solutions. The way that we view the world and the way that we experience it, a lot more of that is in our control than we sometimes feel. An example of that could be if you find yourself having a thought such as, coronavirus is scary. Another way to view that thought or to hold that thought is notice your experience of it and shift that to, I'm noticing that I'm scared. And once you put it in your court, you have a little bit more room to kind of move around with that. And we'll get to more of that in a moment. Anxiety as a state is very projective in nature. So what it's doing is it's trying to predict the future. That's its whole goal. If you're imagining anxiety as a little person that kind of sits on your shoulder, your anxiety is ahead of you. It's not with you, right? It's not in the moment. It's trying to think, gosh, what's going to happen? How can we be best prepared? So in a way, it's trying to keep you safe. The problem is we cannot predict the future. And our brain does not enjoy that feeling. No one likes the ability of not being able to predict the future. So the more uncertainty understandably, the higher level of that experience. It's very normal for people to feel that way. For anyone who has received a cancer diagnosis and is or has gone through treatment, your brain may be on higher alert. That's what happens when we experience something that's crisis related in nature, right? So once something bad has happened, our brain is very aware of the fact that bad things can happen. So your anxiety man on your shoulder is saying, is ringing all the bells, which is a very, very normal response to trauma, change, transition, crisis. This is something that we can work with once we know what we're dealing with, once we know what we're up against. There are strategies for kind of assuaging your anxiety person and saying, our needs are being met right now, but thank you for making me aware. Okay, some things to consider during cancer and COVID. This is a double whammy. I'm sure if you're in this meeting and you currently are in treatment for cancer or have ever received a diagnosis, you're thinking this on top of everything else. It doesn't seem fair. It's not. Also, the people in your life who are typically not in crisis, who are able to be supportive to you, they are currently experiencing something as well, which can, reduce our access to support and things that we typically rely on. The allostatic load that I was referring to is the culmination of experiences that are psychologically draining. So when you've been through some form of crisis for an extended period of time, that feeling where you can't focus, you have a lot of brain fog, you're having difficulty recalling particular names, just you don't feel like yourself, you don't feel that your brain is the way that you're accustomed to experiencing it. Any type of disruption in executive function, that can really come over. The allostatic load refers to the cumulative build there. So it's not, I had a stressful day. It's that a series of stressful days have added up to this experience that's really starting to weigh on me. Adjustment to grief, loss, and change. This is very significant. This could be its own PowerPoint, but there's a lot of grief involved with crisis. There's a lot of change involved with crisis, which is inherently very stressful. On a lot of the stress measurement scales that I use, even a positive change can create a stress response. So whether it is the loss of your good health, your identity as a healthy person, whether it is the loss of your hair or your perceived freedom, right? Your loss of a birthday party that you were really looking forward to, or a trip, or not being able to see your grandchild. These are all experiences that relate to loss. And whether it's something tangible that you can point to and say, I lost that, or something less tangible, there's still an adjustment phase there. We can experience loss and grief related to our expectations about how things would be or how things would look. And for a lot of people, our current reality is not at all what we expected or how we wanted things to go. So therefore, we are all doing a lot of adjusting, and adjusting takes work and energy, and it's a process. Something I really wanted to make sure that I touched on today is the effects of social isolation during an experience that can already be very isolating. One of the biggest things or takeaways from meeting so many people who have gone through cancer in the process is that it can be so isolating, especially if maybe you're the only person that you know who has ever had it. If you are already a social distancing award winner because prior to this virus, you were already practicing social distancing during flu season, during anything else that was happening, if you've been told you're on chemo, don't go to a buffet. There's a long list of things that you're not supposed to do. So it's also psychologically and emotionally, it could potentially be very isolating. A lot of people tell me I just can't relate to people that I've known for a long time. I feel now like, since they haven't had this experience with me, I don't feel as connected to them. They couldn't possibly understand how this feels or what I've been going through. So if you're already feeling isolated and then you add in the social distancing and the fact that the people who brought you your food can't come over. If you're accustomed to having someone sit with you in a waiting room, if you go in for a scan or a procedure, going in alone, that is going to add some significant weight. That is a stress-inducing experience, right? And it's different, so something to consider. We kind of touched on the brain in survival mode a moment ago, where once something bad has happened, we have a heightened sense of the fact that it could happen. A lot of people who I know who have received a cancer diagnosis have expressed symptoms of PTSD to me. It is something that can be very traumatic, and different factors that are related to this virus can be very triggering for people who have a trauma response already to their cancer experience. So an example would be everybody walking around in a medical mask, not being able to go in for something that you want to go in for. Just the general feeling of not feeling safe can be very triggering. And then the strain on relationships and important decision making. So when we are experiencing a disruption in executive function due to the cognitive effects of stress, it can make important decision making even more difficult. Deciding what procedure to have, deciding where to go. These are huge decisions, right? So the average American during this pandemic crisis has been experiencing difficulties trying to decide between, what type of sandwich should I make? And just real simple decisions that we make throughout the day. And I've talked to a lot of people as I don't know. It's because it's really difficult to make decisions and use our decision-making models when we are very overwhelmed. The people who typically help us with those decisions are the people that we're in the closest relationships to, and the social distancing quarantine aspect has drastically impacted a lot of relationships. So almost everybody that I have spoken to, all of my therapy clients and friends are saying, you know what, I don't know who this person is that I'm living with, but I can't stand them any longer. Or I don't want to let them out of my sight. It's impacting the relationship in one way or another because it's an extreme set of circumstances. Or, if we are not with another person, we might not have access to the people that usually help us make these decisions. So it's something that we definitely need to keep in mind. Strategies. Okay, we're going to get into the good stuff here. Hopefully it's what you came for. Self-care, right? So oftentimes when people hear people like me talk about self-care and how important it is, it's one of those things that you can get a lot of eye rolls bringing it up. Pretty much anytime I've ever, lightly suggested that someone might enjoy a journal, a lot of good quality eye rolls happen at that time. But we do want to talk about self-care here, especially if we are what we've got. If we are taking care of ourselves and meeting our needs right now, we need to find a way that we can do it effectively in a way that doesn't also overwhelm us if we have a lot of other things on our plate. So a sustainable wellness model. This is actually based off of a radiation oncologist in Georgia. He wrote a book called Sustainable Wellness. If you are a book person, his name is Dr. Matthew Mumber. And he talks about kind of viewing your wellness from the perspective of a three-legged stool. and realizing that if you consciously make a series of small decisions based around nutrition, movement, and stress reduction and stress management, over time, those three things, if you just kind of keeping them in the back of your mind and you think, okay, I'm going to do what I can to help my body get up and moving. I'm going to do what I can to add good nutrition that gives my body the things that it needs. I obviously hang out in the third leg realm, which is how can we manage our responses to stress in our environment in a way that gives us the best chance to be effective. Making a list. When we are very overwhelmed, the time when we think, I don't know what to do, we want to have some strategies for that written down somewhere before that time comes, because that's not the time when we want to be brainstorming. We're not going to be effective brainstormers. So I always encourage people on a good day, when you're having a good day and you feel really clear and you feel good, maybe you've gone for a walk, maybe you talk to a friend, in that moment, just because you don't feel that you'll need a list right then, go ahead and write down a physical list of self-care activities that you can then turn to in the moments when you don't feel good. I keep one in a drawer in my kitchen, just in case. You like to know it's there, right? So that way I can remind myself of the things that I know help me feel better, ways that I can take care of myself at that time. So I'll look at the list and see, call a friend, go for a walk. These things that sound simple in the moment, it's really nice to have that list of things available for us. Kind of like a gift to you, from you in the past. Right, mention that, especially important when we are our caregivers. Panic attacks. A lot of people have experienced these. There seems to be some stigma around the experience. It can be different for a lot of people, but generally speaking, it is it's a sensory override experience. So if you've ever, some people black out, some people can't catch their breath, some people get like a wave of heat. I've had some people say to me, honestly, I don't know what I was feeling, but in my mind, I just felt like I thought I was gonna die. This is the type of sensory overload that we're referring to. And it's actually a really great idea to have some tools in place for that in the event that you do panic. One of my favorite things to do, or to suggest that people do, is think about your most primal needs, your basic survival needs, right? So if you can take some breaths, great. If you can't, understandable, move on to a snack and a sip of water. So if you can get some water and you can get a small snack in, this is gonna go to the basic survival needs area of your brain and signal, hey, we're meeting our needs, we're gonna be okay. An observation activity would be where you look in your environment and you notice objective things happening around you, right? So if you start to panic and your brain is very much in the future, starting to panic about what's going to happen, start to notice what's happening around you in that moment. So it can be things you see, smell, hear. Just really try to focus in on what you are currently witnessing at that time. A breath trick that I often use, and anyone who's in my life for an extended period of time will hear me suggest this. If you're struggling to take a breath and focusing on breathing actually makes it more difficult, I always suggest take a breath through your nose and imagine you're smelling roses or really fragrant flowers. And then breathe out of your mouth like you're blowing out candles on a birthday cake. And just give yourself the mental imagery there. That's a guided imagery exercise, really. And what that's going to do is give you something to focus on while that is happening. And that method actually is a pretty decent strategy for deciphering, am I anxious or do I have this virus? in the moment, you know, if your chest starts to tighten because you're feeling nervous and you can't catch your breath, that can be really scary right now. And that's a very self-perpetuating. This is a very universal experience that people are having. So it's always good to just notice and observe what's going on. You can get some better, more quality information. Meditation and mindfulness. We offer mindfulness and meditative practices at Cancer Support Community Atlanta. They're on Zoom. The classes are fantastic. If you are a champion meditator, great. If you've studied mindfulness with monks, perfect. If you have not, and this sounds like a huge undertaking, something new to take on, you can get the benefits of mindfulness from practicing mindfulness as it relates to more simple activities. The focus of mindfulness is to bring as much attention to the present moment in your present experience as you can. So an example might be in the morning when you pour your cup of coffee or tea, just notice how the warm mug feels in your hands, any of the other sensations around that, and just if your mind starts to wander, redirect your attention to what's happening in the moment. This is what we're doing when we practice an active breathwork meditation. One thing that's pretty cool that we've learned about the benefits of meditation is that every time your mind wanders and you redirect it back to the present moment, or your breath as a benchmark for that, you're actually reshaping that neural network in your brain. So if you do it enough times, you can actually change the structure of your brain and how your brain operates, making it easier to do that moving forward. And that's thanks to neuroplasticity, which we retain throughout the course of our lifespan. So it doesn't matter if we're 110, we can tap into that neuroplasticity and we can, you know, learn to do that at any time. So learning to do it now is not predicated on having done it before. Mindful consumption. So right now you are on a Zoom call. You are taking in information. There was something about this that sounded like it could be helpful, maybe for you, maybe for someone that you care about, but you're here. So this is consuming this information was a choice that you made. Now we make these choices constantly throughout the day. When we talk about mindful consumption, we're talking about everything that we take in from our environment. It's often discussed in regards to food and, you know, what we consume, right? So if you've been to a mindful consumption workshop, you might have practiced putting your fork down in between bites, really noticing how the food tastes, imagining where the food came from and how many hands it was passed through until it was able to come to your plate. These are all fantastic things to do. We can also pay attention to the content that we take in, right? We're constantly consuming other people's thoughts and feelings, which can get really overwhelming right now because generally speaking, people are not feeling their best. A lot of the ways that people are responding to the crisis don't feel good to us. We find ourselves, you know, angry. There's a lot of self-judgment right now to responses. There's a lot of judgment of other people and how they're responding to it. A lot of arguing happening. Seems like we have reached possibly the anger stage of adjustment to crisis collectively, but that can be really heavy. That's something that we carry. So it can be really important to think about who you're talking to. Notice how you feel when you are with those people, or because of the pandemic and social distancing, when you are communicating with them in some way. So even right now, think about it. How is this presentation making you feel? How do you feel when you are here with other people, sorting this out and being proactive about an experience that you're having, versus in a Facebook argument with someone? And you know, that's not leading in any way. Everyone has a different experience of everything, but it's important to notice as you take in that experience, how does it feel in your body? The news. That watching the news and consuming the news is something that, from a stress and anxiety management standpoint, we should be very mindful. And that's not to say not to watch the news. This is where we get, for a lot of people, not watching it would be anxiety producing because you want to know what's going on. It's a little murky. So the less clarity, the more people are consuming. So if you find yourself, sitting watching the news for a long period of time and you don't feel good after, you might want to re-strategize and think, what's a good amount of time? Is there a news source that I feel most comfortable with? And how can I get my information without overdoing it? This also happens with a lot of people who have received a cancer diagnosis. There's very well-intentioned research that begins. So you have your question that you want answered, so you turn to the internet, and then 4 hours later, you've gone down a rabbit hole that really scares you. And I know the look in someone's face, and I'll often say, you Googled, right? So the internet, we have to be mindful of what we're consuming there. So news research, COVID research, cancer research, we want to find an amount of that works for us individually. And that might look like a strategy of deciding how much time do I want to dedicate to this per day? What time of day am I most able to hear and process this information? When does it seem like I could take it in? Perhaps you write down specific questions that you have going into it. That way, you can kind of control your experience to a certain extent. Turns out researching a virus pandemic and cancer for an extended period of time, especially if we're social distancing, we're not going anywhere, and we have these tiny computers at all times, it can be pretty overwhelming. If there's one thing that I would want anyone who's experiencing stress and anxiety to take away from today, it's how crucial compassion truly can be. And that's not just for other people, for ourselves too, right? It can be so difficult to hold ourselves as we are and not be hard on ourselves for the way that we're handling things, not being hard on the way that other people are handling things. And compassion, I truly feel, is an effective antidote to a lot of worry and stress-related responses to outside stimuli. Example, you see someone doing something they're not supposed to do. Someone says something that you don't agree with or you feel like is extreme. There's something that's upset you. I'm not saying that thing is not upsetting. Sometimes viewing that person in the way that they're handling or coping with the situation through the compassion lens, we might think, what must be going on for someone to respond this way? And what type of suffering might have contributed to moving through the world this way? Recognizing their humanity and thinking, what? Hurt people. So they must not be doing well. And I wish they weren't doing what they were doing, but from that perspective, I'm finding some acceptance of their behavior, even though it doesn't agree with me. That doesn't mean that you are required to share space or time with that person or energy, but what that can do is kind of free ourselves from a lot of the experience on our end as well, right? And that radical self-acceptance of ourselves and others is a game changer. One thing that we typically struggle with a lot is not doing anything, is not being productive, is not getting anywhere, spinning our wheels. Especially in our society, it's a very output oriented. So there's a lot of guilt and shame around being still and giving ourselves permission to just be here, doing the best that we can with what we have, where we are, and acknowledging, you know what, I got up today, I did the best that I could to take care of myself during a really, really difficult time. And it's okay, you know, if I don't get anything done. It's very, very challenging, but it's an important thing. That's work that takes some time to be with. Judgments. So judgments are a part of life and our cognitive process. Judgment is a part of what leads to anxiety and stress response. Your brain has judged this situation as dangerous, as threatening. You might have judged, you know, something as unsafe. These can be very effective judgments. We are making little judgments constantly throughout the day. Where we want to direct our attention to is what judgments are working for me and what's not working for me. So in quotation marks on the slide, you see the work. So this is a book by Byron Katie, and it's an exercise in becoming familiar with our judgments and our judgment patterns. And what that helps us do is observe things as they are, not as we have assigned them to be. So an example of the work would be, I'm going to use a not extreme stress, but potentially stressful situation. You are trying to listen to a presentation and someone next to you is tapping their pencil. Just tap, 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 tap. For some people, this would be very annoying, and it would send you down this kind of rabbit hole of not only is this taking away from my ability to participate in this presentation and get information that I want, but then you start to think that person must not care about anybody else. All these, we start to the judgments can add up, right? The problem is at that point, we're so busy judging the situation that we are missing out on an experience that we could be having, right? So the work is the judging thought that I'm having. Is it true? How can I know that it's true? What are some other possible explanations? And who or what would I be in this moment without this judging thought? In that situation, you would be someone listening to a presentation. Another example that we haven't experienced for a while now is Atlanta traffic. If you're in Atlanta, I know we have folks from all over right now, which is great. In Atlanta, we have traffic when we are out driving around in it. And we have this judgment in our minds that it's bad. Who or what would we be without that thought? I have found myself to be someone finding new music, listening to an audiobook, taking my time. Strategies. I'm gonna jump through these. Hopefully these, I just saw someone get a little kissy. It was really cute. Okay, strategies for anxiety and depression. I'm gonna mention depression during this presentation. I know it's a managing stress and anxiety presentation. I feel that depression is just the other side of the anxiety coin. I think that they are a yin and yang, they go together. We've talked about what we're grieving. We've talked about adjusting to change, the uncertainty. And so having that mix of anxiety and depression is totally understandable. One thing that can be really exhausting is if we are jumping back and forth, like oscillating between feeling really anxious and feeling depressed. That's a really exhausting leap to be making. So what we want to do is find strategies for adjusting. You know, ideally we would want to end somewhere, you know, in the middle without all of those stressful jumps. So some very practical things you could do at any time. Put them into effect today if you want to. Anxiety, like we've said, is very forward focused and typically projective. So if you are feeling very anxious, you are probably thinking about your uncertain future. The brain doesn't like this. It doesn't like things that it can't predict. We don't like that we can't predict the future, and we don't like that we can't change the past. And that's where those two states kind of lie. So I'm going to tell you something about correcting. So if you imagine anxiety is facing forward, if we want to land somewhere in the middle, we're going to want to do something reflective. So you're going to want to gear your mind towards something that has already taken place. A great way to do this is with a gratitude exercise. It's nearly impossible to be grateful for something that hasn't happened yet. So if you think about something in your life that you are grateful for, a person perhaps, an event, a memory, really explore that space if you're feeling anxious. Because again, you're going to be shifting your attention, and where we want to land is kind of in this middle region, right? Be here now. Depression, very, very past oriented. It's the low energy. Anxiety is like the high physiological state. Depression is the lower physiological state. It's slow. It's Eeyore doesn't talk about the future a lot, does he? Things that we can't change are things that we, don't appreciate about our experiences up until this point. If we reflect on those, it can be really heavy. It can create that kind of walking through mud feeling. So if you're feeling sad, try something productive. So right now, there is a lot of uncertainty, so I understand that this is a difficult task. However, that doesn't mean that we can't think about our vision for what we want to do the next day, our vision for some things that we want to put in place for ourselves. I love a little intention board, which basically you just collect things that inspire you, things that make you feel good, and you put them into play with, kind of an action plan. Like if I could shift my life in a certain way, I would want to do it this way, work on that. You could write thank you letters to people that have helped you, healthcare workers. You can go put one out on your mailbox for someone who's collecting your mail. This feels good to other people, and it also feels good to us to be able to express this. And then the letter and the 3 good things exercise, if you wanted to look that up, it is gratitude exercises developed by Dr. Martin Seligman, and he's the father of positive psychology. And Harvard studied those exercises and found that they helped. Quickly, some additional strategies: maintain a schedule. Our brains don't like unpredictability or unpredictability, so make some. During and after a crisis, it's really helpful to just create a set of predictable experiences. If, everything is kind of out of whack, if you have been going into the doctor, but everything's completely different, your whole strategy, make some type of predictability for yourself and provide yourself with solvable problems, which might sound oversimple. It's not. Give yourself some tasks that you can take on, small, manageable tasks. This creates and enhances our sense of autonomy over our environment. Of course, that doesn't mean pressure yourself to redecorate or reorganize your entire house. I'm saying just give yourself like something small and manageable, right? And then keeping a wake and a sleep time is always a good idea for insomnia. And sleep hygiene is always a good idea. There's a lot of information about that on the internet. Whether you're experiencing insomnia or not, it's a great idea to keep a schedule for your sleep during this time. I'm briefly just going to touch on a concept of reparenting and then give you all a chance to ask some questions with Emily, I think. The idea of reparenting as adults is being for ourselves how we would care for a child, right? So what are our needs and how can we lovingly meet them? There are a lot of things affecting our executive function right now. So if you are finding yourself, it's difficult to just get up and get off the couch, that's where, a kind parent to ourselves would say, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to brush our teeth, put on our pajamas, and get into bed because you'll feel better tomorrow. Lastly, reach out. Know when to ask someone for support. Have a plan for when that time comes. Consistently reach out and maintain that social connection if you can. A tool I often provide people with is a map for creating a survivorship support web, which physically, if you start to write down, like on a map, I always say put yourself in the center and then think about the people that are closest to you. And as you work your way out, that's going to be, your house, extended family, friends, community, any support that you find, write it down. As you do it, you'll start to realize that you are so much more supported than it feels like sometimes. And then write down what those people's individual strengths are. So if you have a friend who's really funny, put funny next to that. And then when you're looking at your web and you think, gosh, I could really use a laugh right now, call Linda if she's your funny friend. And then that's a mindful communication strategy right there. And then my last slide that I have for you, my last tip, is to utilize all your resources. If you're here right now, you're doing it. You did it. You did something today. There's a lot of online resources through CSC, which you can find at cscatlanta.org. There's also national and local online resources. I often recommend cancercare.org. They employ oncology social workers. They have a hotline. They're available. They do distance groups like this. We have support groups at CSC every week. So if you want to connect with other cancer survivors, there is a group for you. We have been very mindful of making sure that there's a space that fits for everybody. So reach out to Emily. Right, Emily?
Yes, they can contact me at emily@cscatlanta.org if you're interested in joining one of our groups, and I will get you connected.
Great. It is so good to hear a voice other than my own during this presentation. And yeah, I think that's it. My only other disclaimer is just to be really mindful about the social media communities that you join. But other than that, I think that's what I've got for now.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was a wonderful presentation, especially the strategies that you listed. It's great just to have something tangible somebody can go and do. You did talk about mindful meditation, and I did want to mention that our meditation class, our 10-minute mindful guided meditation, is starting at 12:30 for anyone who's interested in doing that today. Just contact me, emily@cscatlanta.org, and I will get you connected to that program today. One thing that came to my mind as you were talking, Lauren, you spoke a little bit about people experiencing PTSD, like when they're seeing people walking around wearing the mask related to back when they were in treatment, or if they're currently still in treatment. How would you help someone identify if they're experiencing PTSD?
Yeah, great question. Especially because a lot of people who I meet who have PTSD symptoms have not recognized that that is the experience that they're having as a result of their cancer. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we feel that that is limited to someone who has experienced, an acute traumatic event, such as, a war veteran, someone who's a victim of a crime. And in a sense, you have been robbed. Mm-hmm. Of a lot of things. So it makes complete sense to me. I would say the best thing that you could do at that point is to learn a little bit more about what PTSD is, what it looks like. Identify if there are any triggering events or something that happens, and just in the back of your mind, you think, isn't that interesting that I had that response to that? So another concrete example is, unfortunately, there's a lot of triggers that are associated with the pandemic for cancer survivors. Pre-COVID, examples that I would hear would be, I went in for a follow-up appointment, and when they took out the tape measure, hearing the tape measure, I started to panic. I got really anxious. And in that moment, if you're having a response that you're thinking, I don't exactly know where this is coming from, but I don't feel good, a lot of people avoid going back to the building where their treatment or surgery happened. There are a lot of people who might avoid sitting in a chair that they sat in when they didn't feel good. Maybe even a room that people aren't using. My concrete advice is if you had a chair that you were sitting in, get rid of the chair. It's just a chair. But yeah, I would just honestly, my number one thing would just be take more notice of the experiences that you're having. And then if you're sensing a pattern, contact a professional and just let them know, this is how I'm feeling. Is this what's going on?
Absolutely. Yeah. I spoke to a woman one time who her husband was diagnosed with cancer. And she said every time she went back to the doctor's office, they would put her in the same room where she got the diagnosis for her husband. And it was all re-traumatizing every time she had to go back in that room. And it was a simple measure of just going and asking the office administrator, can I have a separate room, so that she didn't have to, but it took her acknowledging that was going on for me to suggest that. And, it was an easy solution, just using your resources, talking to your medical team, if you're experiencing something like that.
Yes, if something doesn't feel right, notice it, say something about it. And I'm really glad that person felt comfortable enough with you to bring that up, that it just something felt off at that time. Because like you said, there can be some fairly, that's not going to address the PTSD as a whole, but in that moment, you were able to take an actionable step and reduce the impact of it at that time, which is fantastic. When people say I don't really get it, I'll reference the, like a violent crime, right? So if you were mugged on your way walking out to your car in a dark alley one night, there would be things that you would do to make sure that never happens again, right? For one, you would not return to that alley at night. You wouldn't do that same exact thing. So for people who have received a cancer diagnosis in a building, it's one of the few traumatic experiences where you are required to return to see if the bad guy is there. And that's, I have a lot of compassion for that. It's a very difficult experience. Yeah, so take notice, love yourself. Do what you would do for the person you're taking care of if you're a caregiver, right? If they weren't feeling good, you would get to the bottom of it. So if you're not feeling right, get to the bottom of it.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we are going to wrap there. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was wonderful information. And again, if anyone has any questions, you can email me, emily@cscatlanta.org, or visit our website, cscatlanta.org. And hopefully we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook. We'll be sharing additional information on upcoming programs.